Welcome back, and our second story is more optimistic than our first, and this talks about Pakistan's economic recovery, whether it be the KSE 100 index that has crossed the 59,000 mark, which we wouldn't have thought maybe a couple of months back could ever happen in Pakistan, but it is happening. Whether it be the different economic reforms that the current caretaker government is undergoing, whether it be the formal request for membership of BRICs that Pakistan has now applied for, a lot of important steps are being taken by this current government, and it hopes that these will reap the necessary fruits within the coming weeks and months and years, and of course the continuity of the policies by the next government post elections will be also extremely important. We'll be joined by Dr. Usman Chohan. He is a political economist and he is with us in the studios. Usman, thank you very much to have joined us. Usman, let's begin first of all with the KSE 100 index crossing 59,000. Did you ever imagine one day, maybe a year back, that we would be crossing 59,000?
Yes, I could imagine it, but that's because, like you, I'm an imaginative person.
All right.
And I'm also an optimist like you. And it's a long time coming, in my honest opinion, because as last time when we discussed it, we looked at the valuations and we saw that the price-earnings ratios were very, very undervalued, even within the category of frontier market indices. So Pakistan really deserves this, and I hope that it goes higher, so long as it is actively backed up by a strong main economy, like Main Street, as opposed to just our Wall Street. So not just financial capital, but we also want to see the signs in the mainstream economy. And there are good things happening on that front too. So I can only imagine that things should go up from here.
All right, wonderful. Before we go to macroeconomic indicators and the steps that the caretaker government has taken, I'd like to highlight the role of the SIFC, whether it be our caretaker Prime Minister who says reforms are being reduced in the investment policy through the SIFC, whether it be Shamshad Akhtar Sahiba, Minister for Finance, who has praised the role of the SIFC on more than one platforms. How important is the SIFC for Pakistan's economic stability and future?
What's absolutely important for Pakistan is to have an easy way of doing business. If this is done with the rest of the architecture, that's great. If it's done with SIFC, that's great. We honestly, as economists, care about the ends being prosperity in Pakistan. The means, well, if you go with one channel, then you have to wonder about the other channels and so on. But insofar as major projects are being highlighted, as far as negotiations and strong whole of government effort is being dedicated to it, I think it's a very good sign. And so we have to see these things. They are long-term projects generally. They are very large-scale projects in multiple sectors. So to evaluate their success will take time, of course. But if we have to take a short-term appraisal, then it seems like things are headed in the right direction.
I was looking through the different discourses that our Minister for Finance, Shamshad Akhtar Sahiba, has had. And whatever she has said seems very plausible and looks to me as if Pakistan has finally taken the right steps for its economic stability and to also come in line with all the demands of the international donor agencies like the World Bank, the AIIB, the ADB, or the IMF. Let's talk about the fiscal deficit and monetary stability. Do you feel Pakistan is going through a period where we are seeing the dividends of those?
Yes, absolutely. So there was a period where there was too much global instability and global economic turbulence, which made it difficult for countries such as Pakistan to know what the next even quarter would look like. Now that impacted us in terms of our planning, and it also put a lot of pressure on the monetary side. Inflation has been very high, and in that regard we raised interest rates very high, even by world standards, and our fiscal deficit was still very large because expenditures were very significant and collections and revenue was not adequate. So that period now seems to be gradually easing off, and it's a good thing because it's not just in Pakistan but around the world you're starting to see positive signs. And it's interesting that in other countries such as the United States, it almost seems like the central bank, the US Federal Reserve, is looking for a chance to raise it even more, almost as if to punish the people there. Now it's not just that they're going to, if they do that, punish their own people, but the effects will also be felt here. So we are part of a larger system in the world, so we are doing the right things. Now it's up to the rest of the world to also do the right things.
All right, let's come to the IMF and Pakistan. Shamshad Akhtar Sahib has said the delivery of loans as far as IMF has been mixed in the past. She says and highlights the non-political processing and delivery of the IMF conditionalities. How important is this also for Pakistan's future as far as its economic stability is concerned?
Well, that's a very good question, because when we look at the track record of IMF programs, our finance minister caretaker is correct that not every program has reached its full fruition. That means that whenever we restart discussions with the IMF, there's always a bad taste because you didn't perform well in the last one. So if we make commitments, we have to pursue them through and then live with the consequences, which are hopefully good ones. So insofar as the current program is going, there was a recent review and it was satisfactory on all fronts. And part of that is the politics that the finance minister correctly addresses, because largely in democracies, when you have an election cycle, you have this urge to spend near the end of the cycle so that you gain votes. This is the political budget cycle theory, and it does apply to a country like ours. Whenever that happens and it coincides with an IMF program, the desire to spend more is still greater for the votes, and so we don't fall through with the program. When you have a caretaker system, these people are not in for the votes. They're in just to fulfill a gap until a full government comes. So they are not bound by that, and they can actually adhere to what the IMF requires, which is difficult. I mean, you can ask our salaried class, you can ask various sectors of the economy. It's not like things are easy for them yet, but if you have to take a bitter pill for economic recovery going forward and to be on the right trajectory and to have less temptations of the budget cycle in future election cycles, then you need to take these sorts of actions now.
All right. You talked about bitter pill. Let's talk of pills, bitter or otherwise, and the reforms that are extremely important or key for Pakistan to stabilize itself and move forward as far as its economy is concerned. Let's talk of the FBR, and Shamshad Akhtar has been highlighting the role of the FBR and what needs to be done. She talks about the restructuring and the transformation of the FBR, which she says is in process, with internal governance that needs to be rectified and a new division that will be created along with the revenue division in the FBR for tax policy design and revenue framework. She also says that FBR needs to concentrate on collections only, and the separation of customs from the FBR is also extremely paramount. How do you see these measures for the stability or maybe a better functioning of the FBR?
Yes, I think that these are the right sorts of measures, and they're honestly a long time coming, because it has appeared to me that for a long time we haven't really given the importance to the FBR that it deserved, because revenue collection is the key in the major equation of one of our major deficits, which is that revenue should exceed our expenditures. There's two ways to do that. Either you cut down expenditures, which is difficult politically, although it is also important and probably necessary, but also to look at revenue collection. Now, the immediate steps in crisis management have involved, for example, squeezing the salaried class. This is inherently unfair because these are people who anyways play by the rules, and it's people like you and me, and we should say it's unfair. But there are sectors of the economy that have been more difficult to tax, or there are sectors which are bound with the global economy. For example, you import more, so you get tax revenue on that, but then you also have to export, etc. So there's all moving parts moving together, which have been difficult for us. So what I'm saying to you is that the FBR's reforms now are mindful of its importance and these moving parts, and therefore I think it is a long time coming.
All right. Shamshad Akhtar has also pointed towards not only the end of this current 3 billion program with the IMF, but also a forthcoming EFF facility for which talks have already begun with the IMF. She talks about the stability, the macroeconomic stability, which she says is quite fragile. She says a blueprint will be given to the upcoming government. How important will it be for the upcoming government to A, continue with the same policies, B, take the Pakistan's fiscal policy, monetary policy and economic growth seriously?
What the caretaker government is doing is setting the ground for the next government, and I think they're doing a very good job in that. Now, does the future government adhere to that and build upon it? It is an open question, and I deep down believe that the IMF, although it's seeing the good signs, will remain skeptical. And that's because it has done business, or it has engaged with Pakistan for decades. So the promise of the next government to the people and to the IMF has to be that we are going to take a rational approach to the economy. We won't live beyond our means. We will try to get more equilibriums working within our system, and therefore we won't require you in the long run. But for now, we're taking program after program so that we can have the liftoff of the economy. That's how the next government should approach it. And we should still keep in mind things like the political budget cycle. These are realities. This is the way the system works. You will vote for the person who promises you and delivers the most freebies for you. These are problems that the IMF will also keep in mind, and we should also be mindful of these things.
One of the requirements of the IMF is to increase the tax net, to make more and more people enter the tax net so that Pakistan becomes a more tax-paying country. The tax to GDP ratio is 9%, and a lot of people say it needs to increase to 15%. One of the measures that is in the pipeline is digital invoicing architecture to be developed through wholesalers, retailers scheme, and tech-driven campaign, for which Shamshad Akhtar talks about an agreement that has been signed with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and this way the non-filers could be also reached across the board, and even if they are not filing their taxes, they could indirectly be filing them one way or the other. How important do you feel this measure could be in the long run for Pakistan's tax net?
Well, to be honest, I think it has extraordinary importance, because insofar as we need to tax people, we already have the tools, but they're sort of dispersed everywhere. And so what the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and NADRA and all these other institutions have to do is reconcile the data, because we can, even though we are a large country, we do have the architecture to know who is doing what, when, where, and why. And we already do indirectly tax everybody, for example, on cigarettes or petrol or all these other things. So now if you have a proper direct taxation system, which is fair, it is neutral, it is efficient, and it is practicable, then you have you will adhere more to the global standards, for example, the OECD standards of taxation. And efficiency is a big part of technology. Fairness is a political thing, but it would be important that, yes, you have to tell the non-filer that you need to get into the tax net, but the truth is that once you do join, we're not going to give you hell, because filers ultimately often do regret being part of that, since non-filers get away with so much. So all we have to do is bring a little bit less disparity.
Bridge that gap.
Bridge that gap, precisely.
All right. When you speak of bridging the gap, how can you bridge the trade gap in your point of view? What would be the measures, if I were to ask you as a political economist, that Pakistan needs to take on an urgent basis, on a short-term or on a long-term basis?
The key things to do for boosting our exports now is to consider what our key industries are. How can their business be facilitated? What is the cost of energy to them? How stable is the energy? How easily can they procure the imports? And that ultimately matters at the short, medium, and long run. But there are some other factors. One is that if the global economy starts to gather pace, then you will have more demand for your exports. Similarly, if you do integrate into a global value chains at higher levels, you will earn more from what you do. Similarly, if you have a better system for keeping capital here and motivating people, both Pakistanis, overseas Pakistanis, and foreigners, to keep their capital here and protect it, then you will get more value out of the earnings that you have. So,
final question, small answer. Foreign Office spokesperson says at a weekly news briefing that Pakistan has made a formal request to join BRICS. How important is it for Pakistan to be part of BRICS as far as its economy or its economic stability is concerned?
The short answer is that it's a huge deal. It's a very big deal, because the BRICS is the future of the world economy. It's about half of the global GDP as it stands, and it's more than 80% of global GDP growth over the next 2 decades. So if you are not a part of this conversation, you are missing out, and you fit naturally in the profile with Russia and Brazil and India and China. So we as a community have to work towards rebalancing the world economy. It's best to do that as a team. The BRICS team.
All right, let's hope we become part of the BRICS team by next year. Thank you very much, Usman, to have joined us. That was Dr. Usman Chohan, leading political economist, talking to us about Pakistan's economic stability, recovery, and of course the desire to join the BRICS, for which a formal request has been made. Also the KSE 100 index that has crossed the 59,000 benchmark, and a lot of good things and reforms that are in the process as far as Pakistan's economy is concerned. Let's come to our last 2 stories. The first concerns a mysterious pneumonia outbreak outbreak that has come as far as China is concerned. First winter in China without strict COVID restrictions since the outbreak of the pandemic 3 years, and they encounter this pneumonia-like disease. On the 13th of November, China's National Health Commission reported an increase in respiratory diseases. In a press conference on Sunday, clusters of undiagnosed pneumonia in children in northern China were reported, and of course the report says infections have proliferated in Beijing and the city of Liaoning in the country's northeast, which are about 800 kilometers apart. But how did it reach all this period? Is it related to COVID? Is it related to the effects of COVID? Maybe the decrease in immunity as far as the people in China is concerned. What else can we expect from the outbreak in China? Chinese authorities say there is a need to step up disease surveillance and strengthen the capacity of the health system. So we wish that China contains this outbreak of pneumonia and respiratory illness like it did COVID a couple of years back. Then we are going to talk about, ladies and gentlemen, the 8th model anniversary of Pakistan's first female fighter pilot, Maryam Mukhtar. This is being observed today. We also saw a television play that was made in her honor as well. Maryam Mukhtar, born on the 18th of May 1992 in Karachi, joining the Pakistan Air Force in 2011, completing her graduation in 2014. 24th of November 2015, she was on a routine training flight with her instructor Saqib Abbasi when her jet developed a fault and crashed at Kundiyan area in Bhakra near Mianwali. The government of Pakistan posthumously awarded and honored her with a Tamgha Basalat on the 23rd of March 2016. It is the valiant efforts of people, women like Maryam, which continue to emanate within the women of Pakistan, and she becomes a role model for all those who want to follow in her footsteps. We will and want to see more women becoming as strong and highlighting Pakistan on the global arena as Maryam Mukhtar did. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah on Monday with news story segments that pertain to us here in Pakistan. It's the weekend. Have a great one, but stay safe. Allah Hafiz.